That to me is craniosacral therapy. So it's not like it is physical, and there's deep unwindings that happen through the craniosacral system, but it goes way below and beneath the physical as well. Like it's kind of like what's really going on in the body. That's the question that Cranio seemed to ask. And so for me, that was very mysterious what the body was all about. You know, these things that we consider just physical have all these dreamings in them and all this. So in a way that led me in some ways, or it didn't lead me. There were two parallel tracks that opened up with the energy work and the astrology. And the astrology seemed to describe something about the energy work, and the energy work seemed to describe something about the astrology, you see. So they were just sort of like these buddies, those two, like two twins. And one was looking from the top down onto everything, one was looking from the bottom up at everything. And I was like, there's got to be a way to bridge these.
What if the key to healing your mind, body, and soul lay hidden in the symbols and stories of the ancient world? Well, in this fascinating conversation, Chris Skidmore, a gifted astrologer, craniosacral therapist, and psychotherapist, takes us on a journey through the hidden realms of healing, exploring the intersections of astrology, mythology, and the physical body. Chris reveals how the archetypal language of the cosmos can bridge the divide between our inner and outer worlds, guiding us towards profound transformation and balance. So, through the lens of mythological figures like Hermes, Chris invites us to rethink the stories we tell ourselves and embrace the full spectrum of our being, light, shadow, and all. So this is a conversation that challenges binary thinking and inspires a deeper connection to the rhythms of life, offering a fresh perspective on personal and collective healing in a rapidly changing world. Enjoy. So good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on which side of the globe you are sitting in or on or under or above. In this very moment, we have an amazing guest for you. We have Chris Skidmore. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Catherine. Happy to be here.
Happy that you are here. And I was just looking at Chris's background for those that are either watching or listening. Beautiful, serene background in Bali. So welcome to our show. And I love Bali. We're just having a bit of chat how Bali is. So it's very beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can see that in the background, huh? Nice big roof
Gorgeous.
up there. Nice
Yeah.
big ceiling.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So the way that we love to start the show, Chris, we always love to ask our guests, what inspired you to do what you do today?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a tricky one to answer. I think for me, I grew up in Perth, Western Australia, and went through the school and university thing, and I got my degree in marketing and economics. I did all this kind of thing, and I went traveling, and actually I was all set to meet some friends in the Greek island of Eos, and but I had 5 days to spare between meeting them and arriving. And I was thinking, I'm just going to have like a bit of time, just I don't know, I'll just stay in the hotel or something, because my mind couldn't fathom what might happen just with me traveling on my own. And actually, what happened instead is like I met these people on the plane, sorry, and we ended up going to these islands, and these experiences just happened in those 5 days, one after the other, that made me wonder if um, there was a plan underneath the plan, right? Like, or a plan in a sideways track that could be way more interesting than my planned life. And so I think those 5 days really kind of showed me, oh my God, this is a really interesting world out here. All sorts of things can happen. And then I met my friends, and I was like, oh yeah, we do our thing, and so what we always did. And so I left them behind, and I went and spent two months traveling through Europe. And all of these openings happened firstly on the kind of like physical plane, moving to all these new places, but then in the other dimensions, and some of the kind of things that happen in the more ethereal space. And experiences that you can never really describe or explain, and they don't necessarily translate into the everyday language or everyday world, or as my mentor Brian Clark would say, like the day world. These were more night world experiences. They don't necessarily translate to the day world, right? Like the dream time experiences that you have, and are very profound and real, but you try to kind of like translate them over into the day world. They don't really fully translate. And it led me to um, meet a series of very interesting witch-like women, I would call them, like crone figures, three in a row, these crones, three crones, and a psychic medium, a shamanic druid, and a light worker in parts of the UK, and the light worker was in Istanbul. And the experiences were just undeniably real to me. And like the old idea of gnosis, like knowing that it's real, um, but couldn't really be translated, as I said, into the everyday world and the scientific paradigms and the materialist frames and things like that. So that kind of led me to the big adventure of my life, which is like, how do you? I know these things are real. I know that these things have powerful impact and effect on the lives that we live, and yet I don't know how to translate it. And so in a way, I consider myself, maybe just from this conversation right now, saying it now, like a translator. Like I've learned a language through astrology or through craniosacral therapy or through process work. It is a language, but then I need to be able to translate that in order to get the gold through, or to help others find that gold within themselves as well. Um, so I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's a little snippet of my path.
It does fully answer the question. I'd love to understand because I mean, I love the fact astrology is a language in itself, but then how do you blend that in with the psychotherapy and the craniosacral side of things? Because I thought craniosacral would be more like a physical component. Then you've got the psychotherapy might be more like psychological, and then obviously astrology is everything and anything in
Yeah,
between of all of those, right? So
yeah.
how are you blending the three?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, the craniosacral actually is, although it is physical, in a lot of ways, it comes off osteopathy. So the osteopathy, there was a guy, A.T. Sill, back in the day that was doing all these adjustments. And then one day he just realized the same client was coming back again and again. And he was kind of like tired of it. And so he put his hands on her feet and just kind of like sat there for like 20 minutes, just kind of thinking like, how can I help this person? And then when he came out of like a trance state, she was like, that was amazing. Can we do that again next week? And he's like, oh, do what? And she's like, oh, whatever you were doing there is amazing. My whole system was like reorganizing itself. And that to me is craniosacral therapy. So it's not like it is physical, and there's deep unwindings that happen through the craniosacral system, but it goes way below and beneath the physical as well. Like it's kind of like what's really going on in the body. That's the question that Cranio seemed to ask. And so for me, that was very mysterious what the body was all about. These things that we consider just physical, have all these dreamings in them and all this. So in a way that led me in some ways, or it didn't lead me. There were two parallel tracks that opened up with the energy work and the astrology. And the astrology seemed to describe something about the energy work, and the energy work seemed to describe something about the astrology, you see. So they were just sort of like these buddies, those two, like two twins. And one was looking from the top down onto everything, one was looking from the bottom up at everything. And I was like, there's got to be a way to bridge these. And it was only 2018 when I actually went back to school, at a school called Metavision, which is in the east coast of Australian Southern Highlands. Um, Christina Nielsen is like a mentor and a friend who started that. And that was this way of, so the psychotherapy was like a bridging of the language of astrology and the language of craniosacral, because it is a language. It's a very craniosacral is like this. You come out of the surface world, you drop down into this oceanic consciousness, and then there is a language down there as well, you know, but it's slow. It's like maybe the way whales might speak to each other. That's what I sense for that deep lower world frequency, like oceanic world frequency. Whereas I find the astrology has got a million things to say all the time, right? So how to bridge those two, and then sort of like see how that's forming its own understanding of reality, to be honest. And then it just happens to be kind of an amazing combination to put together to work with people because it has
Mm.
a lot of, it's like a big net, you know, it's a big net. It's got the spirit and the soul and the in between worlds all sort of like in it together.
Yeah, I had a smile because when you were talking about astrology in itself as we evolve, I find, as I was alluding to at the start, that I've been dabbling with astrology since my mid-20s, but there's still times I'll look at it and I'm like, how did I not see that in the chart? But
Yeah,
I think it's
right.
like it's almost like it's there's things that come to the surface when when you are ready to receive the information. I feel
Yeah.
anyway. That's how
Yeah.
I've seen it. So craniosacral, is it, and maybe I misunderstood. I thought it was working with the actual, a lot to do with the headspace,
Yeah. So
which then linked into the body and the meridians, or
not the meridian. Well,
no.
you can get to the meridians through craniosacral. So I did do an extra module that was about accessing the meridians through it. But let's just get a bit of a basics of what it is. So
Mhm.
cranial means the head, sacral means the sacrum. So it's really that's the whole spine that it's connecting to. And on the more technical side of craniosacral therapy, it's really working with cerebrospinal fluid. And that's the fluid that goes around the brain like a shock absorber and up and down through the meniscus in the spine. And so you can, and because that whole system is the nervous system essentially, you know, all those nerves come back to there. To get that fluid moving is to relax the nerves and then to relax the whole system. So that's kind of the technical side of it. But the thing is that what happens when your nervous system does relax is that it reveals, because it's not like what you just said, right? Like the chart shows you something. This is in the astrology. The chart shows you something that you've seen 1,000 times and never seen, which means the chart must be playing some kind of a game of conceal reveal. And the body's doing the same game of conceal reveal. Like it's not ready to show you that yet, and it has reasons not to show you that yet. But sometimes you can get that nervous system by accessing the cerebrospinal fluid, which is kind of like, I guess, what we're doing. Although it often doesn't feel, it often feels much more ethereal than that because it's not necessarily in the physical the way I experience it. But let's say it is getting that cerebrospinal fluid moving. So there's parts where it gets stuck along its journey. Now, when it moves, the nervous system settles, and when the nervous system settles, you access this really deep um, sense of okayness, like a very sometimes overwhelming sense of like, oh my God, everything's fine, that you haven't experienced for a long time because we're in a world that keeps us cranking, you know. Especially now, it's like information just keeps pouring over us and we don't really know what to do with all of that. So instead of that, we drop down and then open up. And then there's this revelation of like often old memories or images, even. And this is where again, the mythology kind of like the mythology embedded in all of these systems is like it emerged up from my first experiences because I was like, how do I describe to someone what happened in that craniosacral session? And in the end, the only way that I could really get to it was to use dreamlike language because it was a dreamlike experience. So if I put sort of like a logical language on it, it can work, but it feels like you're not really being true to it. But if I put mythic language or symbolic language on it, it makes a lot more sense. And because it's operating out of that space, right? It's like a deep kind of emergent field.
So obviously you had the cranial sacral healing for you to get into it and for you to experience that obviously the the narrative or the story, the dream that resided within you to surface for you to be able to connect with it.
Exactly. Yeah. I've been very blessed in my life to have really great mentors. I mean, partly I've sought them out, but partly they've just been there. Um, Usually a bit older than me. And yeah, I feel quite emotional talking about it because I feel like elders are so essential in this life. And I feel like there's such a space for that kind of like when you go when you get to the 50 plus, it's like you're in a different life actually. And that's kind of turning around and giving back all this stuff that you know and can help with. And I think oftentimes in the world, you know, which is normal the youth of the world to think that they know. But to me, I realized quite early I didn't know much at all, and I was better off relying on these elders. And they've never really let me down, you know. So I got a lot of help along the way, and one was a craniosacral teacher that I met in Bali in 2008 when I came here, and he was really working in the deep dreaming. You know, he was really he didn't make his work technical language wise. He allowed it to be. He talks about the tide, and he says that everything comes back to the tide. Um, so this kind of like, which is a watery idea, right? It's like tides are coming in and out all the time of the human system, and it's just like if we can imagine that tide doing what it needs to do and getting behind the tide, then a lot of healing's available just from that. Um, but those kinds of experiences with amazing practitioners and teachers like that um, have helped me along the way just to give like little bits of like, okay, just learn this for now, just learn this for now, and then eventually start to thread them together, which has been really only the last, say, 4 or 5 years where I've started to thread them, to weave them, and sort of find my own way to put it all together, if you know what I mean.
So what came, because I know you do astrology, psychotherapy, and craniosacral. Which one came first? Because when you were talking about this thing emerging, I know you're into Greek mythology as well.
Yeah.
Whether that came from the astrology or whether that came from that in experiencing the tide that you speak about.
I think some kind of combination, really, because in my early days, like in those early travels, I was kind of like, you know, in my early 20s, super experimental young guy, actually. You know, like once I'd left Perth behind, it was like the leaving the Shire, you know, and I was on this big grand adventure. And I think in that adventure, I really embraced it. I went broke, I got married and divorced. I made a ton of really bad mistakes along the way. But I also learned a lot along the way. And so what I found was in those days, astrology had come along with sort of some experimental healing before I discovered craniosacral, and craniosacral put like a a frame on that. And to me, it's a good question. Where are the myths? Well, the myths are definitely in astrology. You know, I mean, when I was reading my early books on astrology, it was like Liz Green, Howard Susportes, and these kinds of cats who are the depth psychologists who are using mythology. And every time they tell a little story, I found myself getting so excited. And when they go in another direction or leave the story behind, I was like, no, go back to the story. And so I realized that I really wanted to know these stories. Um, but a bit like the conceal reveal thing we were talking about earlier, I find Greek mythology in itself conceals itself, it like hides itself. Took a long time for it to really start to open up and show me its own thing, right? So the Greek myths are clearly in the sky because that's where we put the myths. That's the way that our ancestors decided to keep it. You know, they projected it out onto the planets and stars and constellations. So that's where the myths kind of reside in a way, but they're really in the deep human experience, aren't they? They're really in the like over many thousands of years. These are the core experiences that we call the archetypes, which I know you're really into, Catherine. You know, the the archetypes are a substructure of reality, according to Jung, right? Like a substructure of it, and we don't have a you know, we we kind of need that layer if we're going to see all of reality. Like Saffron Rossi says, like the archetypal eye. If you don't have the archetypal eye working, you may just work with one eye, the logical, rational eye. Um, but once you bring in the archetypal eye as well, you get the you get sort of like a bigger, broader picture of reality.
Mm. I love that. And it's so true. Like, I believe that we can tap into all the different, well, once again, if you go back to Carl Jung, when he was talking about collective consciousness, I mean, they're all there for us to tap into and activate them. That's why I love how you can actually dance with a specific archetype, or if I need a little bit more fire in me or a little bit motivation, I might, dance with Mars for a little bit and really, bring in that archetype, embody that archetype to help me motivate me to do the very thing that I need to do. I was curious when you were talking about the stories and the myths, the Greek mythologies that you've been exposed to, which one's your favorite?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, I have a favorite god or demigod. Um, Stories wise, there's so many. Well, okay, so even that, see, this is the thing about the archetypal world. It's sort of for me, it never lets me have a favorite, which is why I kind of love it so much. But I do love Hermes. Um, I love the story, the Homeric hymn to Hermes, because I love the sort of cheekiness of his approach. He's like just been born, creates music out of a tortoise, goes and steals Apollo, his big brother's cattle, um, lies about it, cheats, steals, like all this kind of thing. But he's creating mischief, but he's also creating a lot of humor. And I was just thinking about it when I was driving on my scooter today because I was off this morning and came back for the interview. And I was thinking about Hermes, like he's a trickster, and you think he's just being naughty, but then once you see the whole picture, you see that he sort of rearranged the whole world in a really positive way. Um, but to do it, he was very tricky about everything. But he rearranged, you know, the hierarchies and the structures and things, and he did it playfully, joyfully. He did it with a lot of creativity, and everything that he saw in the world, he just kind of like saw it, and he also saw something else, right? So, like when he sees the tortoise and he also sees music inside the tortoise. He's like, that tortoise is cool, but I could also turn it into an instrument. And then when it's an instrument, I can play all this music, that kind of thing, right? Like, so it's the ability, I think he gives us the ability to look at and also look through what we see, you know? Like
Mm.
see opportunity, to see like, oh, that's not just that thing. That could also be all these other things. And there's something so playful and creative about that. And I think the world really needs that kind of energy. And it's calling it forward anyway, probably in its shadowy trickster form. So if we could see if we're pulling forward trickster energy, maybe we can use that energy to bring forward the great side, the beautiful side of that, which is creative, playful, joyful. It's a change agent. It allows like the systems of power to be deconstructed, reconstructed, all the things we kind of need.
Mm.
But of course in its shadow side it can polarize and it can get people split off from each other as well. So I would say Hermes is a really great one. But honestly, when it comes to the myth, like even when you ask me the question, three or four competing figures just like jump out at me. I can't help it.
Mm. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I can see that from a collective as well. The dichotomy at play. It's
Yeah.
so evident. And I love the fact that just the way that you describe that, it's very expansive. There's so much more possibility when you look like this is not just one thing. There are more aspects to this one thing when we choose to look at it in a very different light. So I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
And Hermes helps us with that, right? Because otherwise think it's either this or that. And Hermes is always looking for the third thing. That's why he's like the ruler of Gemini, and Gemini is the twins, but also the third sign. So it's like it looks like the shadow side of Gemini gets split into this or that, but the evolved Gemini is looking for the third thing that comes between the tension of opposites. Like so, the opposites give birth to the third thing. And I think the third thing is really, really, this is a passionate area for me. It's really what we need right now because we keep getting pulled into the idea that it's just this or that. It's just choose this way or that way. And that's always going to polarize. It's always going to split us. And it's not a very creative and spiritually sound way to be in the world.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we practice. I think I explained to. We have a positive psychology coaching program, and we always say we've got three principles, and many other. We look at things as not good or bad, not wrong and right, and we really practice as part of our principles non-judgment, non-resistance, and non-attachment as part of our principles. But it is, you see it, the dichotomies at play rather than sit there, because as a coach, you've got to be able to sit there and not judge and allow and accept and give space to whatever is presented in a room, right? For that person to feel seen, heard, and valued. But you can see sometimes it is that, sometimes it is that play of that shadow and the light that intertwine and interfere with the whole what's at play. So you see this play out as well, which I love the fact that you brought that up. I'm really curious with astrology. So obviously with all the work that you do, which is wonderful work that you do, from an astrological perspective, do you have individuals that come to you for astrology reading, or do they come with a problems per se? Let's say, I'm getting migraines all the time and I've tried everything. Or do you combine all three? Like, how does it actually work? And I'm sure our audience is really curious. Like, how does that work for you, Chris? Do you have people that come to you for readings or other things that are going on in their life?
So yeah, that's a good question. I still do like I was doing back in the day, just readings, 60-minute or 90-minute readings where we look at the chart. It might be a bit of a one-off. We go as deep as we can into the symbols of the chart. I try, obviously, as you can probably hear in who I am, I try not to get stuck in particular interpretations. I'm often trying to get people out of previous interpretations, which is a bit hermetic of me, I suppose. Like I think you can have an astrology reading that can sort of solidify something that shouldn't be solid. And so I try to kind of like help people out of that. Again, well, a bird just flew into this window. That was really interesting. Um, Anyway, so I'm trying to sort of like bring the myths forward in the chart to bring it out. So some people will come to me just to do that reading, and that's how my approach for the reading will be like that, kind of like get it alive, make sure it's related to the life that you're actually living and the problems that are actually here in your life. So it doesn't matter to me if the chart like tells you exactly who you are or that kind of thing. I mean, the chart is a remarkable thing. It's its own life force, and it has different things to say at different times, which is why you're going to get different readings at different times. Even with the same astrology, you get very different takes on the chart because you're evolving, it's evolving, and what you need to know is evolving. So I can do those one-offs, but I don't do that as much anymore. My favorite work with astrology these days is longer term work. So basically long-term psychotherapy work. And as a friend and colleague, Jason Holly, once said, the chart is like a wise elder in the room that will kind of interrupt you sometimes and say, "Hey, you guys are missing this. The two of you are missing this." So the elder just sort of sits with you and interrupts and says, "No, you got this wrong, you two," and it can steer you in a better direction. So that's what I really love, like when I'm doing longer term psychotherapy work and the chart remains backgrounded in it. And then a part will come up. As you said, Mars might just kind of like pop up sometimes. It's like, oh, this is the Mars complex that you have. It's like hard for you to be assertive. It's hard for you to take action. It's hard for you to have that drive and that will, that people pleasing thing. These are all things that can be related to Mars not really functioning or firing quite right. Like you don't have all cylinders going. So while we're doing our long-term work, we can see the myriad ways that actually plays out. And then we're getting a much deeper version of the chart versus that one off. So I still like one off readings though, because I feel like a bunch of things can happen in that 1 hour, 90-minute time frame that I really, appreciate that they happen. But I also love the longer term work. And as you said, with the physical symptom, oftentimes that'll be something that if someone's here in Bali, they can come, we can put them on the table and do some work as well, where we can work on that more body-centered soma level. I can do that over Zoom too. We can do kind of like elements of that, but there is something about the hands, there is something about actually putting hands on a system. Um, that yeah, someone comes with migraines, someone comes with vertigo recently, where we just did some work of like following the vertigo and sort of finding our way out of that. These kinds of things the craniosacral is super useful for just on its own. So as you can hear, like weaving them all isn't necessarily an easy thing because you're not quite sure which tool to pull out of the tool belt. Like what are we best off doing? Conversation, or should we put the person on the table? Or is the chart speaking, or should we do more classical psychotherapy? It's like that's the challenge of having multiple tools, but I always feel like I'm guided by whoever these gods are in a way, right? Like, or whoever the spirits of the work are. So I feel pretty comfortable in it now, but it has been like 20 years of exploration. So it can take a little while to get that comfort where the astrology comes up today, the psychotherapy comes up this day, craniosacral comes up this day, a big mythology session comes up this day, the archetypes or whatever it is, and just trusting in that because I think it does have its own rhythm and its own path, its own life.
I love that. There's so many in that. So first of all, I wanted to say I'm the bird lady. So when you said that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm
Oh,
known as the
really?
bird lady. I am. Birds follow me everywhere, and I end up feeding them. So in my backyard, I've got all these cockies and magpies, and then I
Really?
was in France just recently setting up, and there's all these bluebirds, and there was blue. I'm always so everyone's calls me the bird lady. So when you said that, I had a bit of a smirk because I was like, okay. That's a bit creepy that now it's going virtual.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love the fact that you talked about the long term because it is, I think it is, it's not just a short term. And people are so into, I want a quick fix, I want to know what I need to do, and gone.
Yeah.
Where it's, and I love the fact that, yes, there are many astrologers out there that use it as a predictive tool, but I really believe that, and I love what you do and how you do it, because as I mentioned, we do have a lot of astrologers that do our coaching course to flip the switch. So instead of saying, this is what's going to happen, say, what are you experiencing in this area of your life? And let them tell the story, because the story and the archetype is residing within that individual. Allow that archetype to come out and speak for itself. If it was sitting
Exactly.
next to you right now, if Neptune was sitting next to you right now, what would it like to say?
That's it.
So you
Yeah.
can really, I love the fact that you can do that, but you can really explore, and it doesn't happen in one session. These sessions, like even our sessions, they go 10 sessions before you go, wow, like all of a sudden you get this big, the theme is there, but then you really tap into the depth of it over a period of time.
That's it. And maybe because I've sometimes I've done like a one-off reading with somebody and then we've gone into long-term work and it's like, wow, I mean, the reading still has its place for sure, but the longer term work shows you like, as I said, the myriad of experiences that relate to, say, Mars or Venus or Mercury. There's a whole range of experiences and sometimes it's like really beautiful, it works so well, and sometimes it works super shadowy and like how can we really get the depth of that without having some experiences in the belt for us, like in the background for us to work with. So I've got a client who's in Australia and I think we've been working together for 3 or 4 years now. um and her chart's just there. We don't necessarily use it. But then what's been so beautiful for me is to watch her understand her life with the lens of her chart, or some combination of lens and life, right? Because sometimes she'll go like, oh, that's my Mars. She kind of, I can see what's happening there. But you need some time to bridge between what the chart knows and what you know about your life. right? I mean, the chart to me, what I've realized over the years, despite all my arrogance about it, is that my chart knows more about me than I do. And that's a little bit intimidating, right? Like, how does this chart know me better than I know me? Surely I should be the one knowing me. But my chart seems to look at me and go like, "Oh, there you go again." Like it seems to hold information that I can't really ever fully get or grok. Like I'll never really get to the bottom of my chart. And I think that's kind of like the beauty of these things. And that's why also, like you say, so predictive astrology, God, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but I could get a sense of the archetypal qualities of it because I can see the transits and progressions, and so those are going to be showing me something really accurate. Um, but I can't predict which way that's going to go, mainly because, as you said, I don't know what your relationship to the archetype is quite yet. If you have a good relationship with Pluto, say, and you get a Pluto transit, expect good things actually, because you have a really good relationship with that character.
Which I do. My Pluto's just moving into my fourth house, Aquarius, and no wonder I've got itchy feet about moving into another country. But at the same time, I just
Yeah,
think, people look at it and go, "Oh wow, you're going to go through some massive change." And I'm like, yeah, but I love that. It's all about transformation, right? It's all about, I love transformation. I mean, I'm a Scorpion moon, Scorpion rising. I mean,
there you go.
I love transformation. And my son's in Pisces as well. So I know I've come here
Uh-huh.
to learn boundaries because Neptune's
Uh-huh.
in my first house as well. And so, but
Me
it's one
too.
of these things. I think too, Chris, we teach what we must learn. So even though I'm
Yeah.
like, you think you got it after all these years, Catherine? And no, no, it's like what you say, your chart knows you better than you know it, right? But you will only see it when I believe. That's why I say sometimes I'm looking at it and go, oh, how did I not see that? But I feel like it expresses itself to you. It's a living thing that expresses itself, dances with you, and you're ready to see it.
And that's the thing, like as you say, sometimes you're staring down at the chart and it's almost like one planet becomes 3D and the others just fade into the background, like one comes forward. And I trust moments like that. Like it can honestly almost physically look like that, like a planet has come forward to say, like, this is all about this. And that may not be something that my logical mind can understand why, or I don't have technique for that. I don't know about some transit going on, but that's the one that's coming forward. And so I trust that that's the one coming forward, you know?
Mm.
And I do think it is. It's like each of these planets, they have a whole mythological line in our lives. Each one does, right? So you could tell your whole Venus story. This is a really good way to do it, actually. So you can put it in a vector that's going through your life. You have a whole Venus story, you have a whole Mars story, you have a Jupiter story. And each of these stories, they're way more mythic. And this has been a real beautiful realization that keeps realizing itself, I think, is that we, as Melanie Reinhardt, she's another great mentor of mine, as she said once, there is no such thing as an ordinary life. And I think as astrologers, we get to see that even more so because we can see, especially when you take that Jungian lens, because then you can see that everybody really is living a myth or a series of myths. Um, and once you really see the life myth that's being really lived through people, and through collective, because that's where I'm kind of facing my mind right now is like I really want to know about the masses. I really want to know about like how astrology can help us understand mass, like the themes of the masses, which it obviously can. Um, but what direction are sort of we all heading in, and where is the masses in our own consciousness as well, which I think those outer three planets give us a bit of a glimpse into. Much less personal, but
Mm.
still residing on the inside, residing in the psyche too.
Mm.
So, you know,
So,
again,
so what is the thing? Because I mean, I do a little bit of astrology as well, and I know that it's a number eight here from a collective standpoint, and I can see that like we're stepping. I feel like even astrologically, I feel like because there's going to be so many shifts in 2025, I feel like 2024 is preparing us for what's to come in 2025. And the number 9 is really the letting go piece, the ending piece. And it's about us as human, as individuals, as in like the things that are ending, the things that are changing, the things that are reshaping and transmuting and transforming collectively. So I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are you seeing when you're talking about the masses? What kind of like evolution are you tapping into?
Well, I mean, in some ways, and again, this is just an insight, maybe just happening right now. See, Aquarius is where all the action is, right? With Pluto moving into there. Of course, there's all these other ingresses next year. It's a really wild year. If you don't know, if you do know, then you're probably a little bit strapped in for it. But 2025, so many things happening. But one of the probably the key one is Pluto moving to Aquarius, and Aquarius is the sign that's opposite Leo. So Leo is the individual consciousness, the self, and Aquarius is the collective consciousness. And that's different than the collective unconscious, which is where all the archetypes lie. The collective consciousness is a bit of a different thing. It's like the hive mind, the collective mind. And so, well, what does that mean? I mean, the Leo Aquarius axis is really interesting because that's kind of like the performer of Leo and the crowd of Aquarius, or the individual psyche and then the tribe psyche. And I think it's time for us to try to understand a little bit, like to get into the psychology of the masses. I think will really help us to sort of ride through this time and to understand, what is mass psychology and how does it get sort of hijacked and what are the technologies behind that? And this is historical. We can look back and see how the mass psyche gets kind of like pulled and swayed in certain directions, which ends up like these algorithms, right? It ends up making us feel as though we're in completely different stories. And so I think what is Pluto? It's the mulching of all of that. And I do think there's been this period in the last 18 months of the mulching, which can be super uncomfortable. But then as we move forward, it's like if you're in a personal Pluto transit, if you try to just put your old clothes back on and just pretend like you're that again, it's like, well, okay, we'll pretend then expect Pluto to come and kick your ass because he hates that. It's so unreal. Like I think Pluto is like a deep reality check. It's like, that's not real. Don't put those old clothes back on. You are changed. You can't pretend to be a butterfly. You can't pretend to be a caterpillar now. You're butterfly, right? And so I think it's like a time when collectively we have to realize that when Pluto was moving through Capricorn and changing all these systems since 2007, 2008, things have changed in pretty drastic and really big ways. And I think it's a chance for us to actually look back if we go back to 2008 and we look at just how many changes the world been through in that time, just kind of like take that in and then think, okay, we are in a different world, a different paradigm. Of things that worked then, they don't work now. So, but then how can we make this new thing work? How can we actually make it so, to me, I have my Neptune in the first as well. I'm a Pisces moon and a Cancer sun in the eighth. So, like I want to lean into the water side of things a bit here because that's the connector. Like rather than splitting off, like which happens, it's okay that it happens, but also can we just bring a little bit of a sensibility to that magical third way rather than keep getting stuck in the good versus evil paradigm? Oh, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad. And that's an algorithm. And that is the algorithm of Aquarius, by the way, because if you look at the glyph of Aquarius, it's like sharp lines, up, down, up, down, up, down. So it's saying like true, false, true, false, true, false. It's a series of true, false statements. Which is a binary code. And the question for me that Pluto gives us is like, how do we break out of a binary way of thinking without doing that in its too surface a way? You can sort of like, you can break out of it in a surface level, or you can really get, no, it's not working. This is not a good model for reality. to be binary about it.
I feel that, and I've been speaking about it for some time, that I feel we just need to drop into our heart a lot more. We've been too much in the mind, too much in the thinking. Aquarius, I know it's air and it's very, out there, and it's, with technology, AI, it's very much, uh, you know, uh, I mean, it's very expansive, don't get me wrong. And I think it's great. I think even AI in itself, you can, you know, dance with it and use it rather than resist it. I think that goes back to one of the principles I was talking about. Non-resistance is really important for all of us to practice, so we're not so fixed, which Aquarius can be quite fixed in its kind of like its energy. I think we need to be more fluid, and that goes back to what you were talking with the water sign. A little bit more fluid in the sense that we allow things to come and go. I love the fact that you talked about the tide, because I was thinking about the coming and the going of, everything. I always think that things repeat for a reason, things cycle or loop for a reason, and so we're just in one of those cycles, and if you go back in history, this has happened. But it's even understanding. I mean, I love, everyone goes, oh, the revolution, the American Revolution or the French Revolution, whatever that may be. It's like, yeah, that's what happened then, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen now. It's up to us. I think it's up to the people what they do with the cosmic energy that's around us, right? It's how we play with it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and if you move astrology backwards, which is the direction the nodes go in, so there's something about that kind of like evolution actually reversing. So if you think about the deep dreaming of Pisces, then becomes a form in Aquarius if you're going backwards. So this is why I think one of the big things of 2025, if we look at it, what's happening really, we have Pluto moving into Aquarius, but at the same time we have this dance, as you say, you've said dance a few times, and it is a dance. The big dance is between Neptune and Saturn next year. That is a big combination of two of the edge figures of the solar system in a way, right? Two figures that try to claim what the edge of reality is. Saturn in that like this is the limits, this is the edge, this is the known, and Neptune in like, well, this is the real edge, this is the real known, right? Like these trans-Neptunian objects, of which there are over 300,000 of them and counting and keeping on expanding out into the universe. So while Saturn used to rule the old edge, Neptune rules the new edge, and both of them are dancing between Pisces and Aries. And that's no small thing, because that's the very end beginning of the zodiac itself. So while we see this thing happening in Aquarius, we could almost be transfixed. We could be fixated on the Aquarian element of it and the fixed element of it, as you say. Or we can say like, yes, something is changing there, but what is it? And then I think it's the dreaming and manifestation of Pisces, of Neptune, Saturn. It's the what is in the dreaming mind, and are we able to be honest? I think we need to redirect attention to telling better stories, telling stories that everybody is in. Not like this is my side and that's your side, and completely different. Like, I mean, it's as absurd as I've ever seen it in my lifetime, where people can't agree that we're in the same basic story, and you're seeing it from this side, I'm seeing it from this side. Now it's kind of like, well, if you're in that side of the story, you're evil. Um, both sides are doing that. So it's like Neptune's the only one that could really join that all together, but Neptune can also be the planet of illusion and confusion. So Saturn coming along and joining Neptune, it feels like two of these old primordial being coming together and saying like, okay, this has gone a little far. Like, let's try to get a little bit of structure to this dreaming and a little bit of dreaming to the structure. And if we can just kind of like play those, which they will, they'll dance with each other for a long time, right on the edge of the zodiac beginning and end point. So I do feel like, the symbols certainly have this potential for some kind of a rebirth, some kind of renaissance, and some kind of revolution. But I fear that if we don't have a deep enough dreaming process, then that revolution will just be more divisiveness, more separation, and, to be honest, more war. And so it really is it's like Hermes, you know, it's like Hermes. He inspires us to break out of our prisons and come back to the musical. That's the first thing he does in his life. He breaks out of the prison, which is his crib and his cave, and he creates music, right? Like he creates and sings music. So he does come into the heart or the soul or the wholeness of things. And he's able to sort of inspire us to, let's look towards the hidden element of the world that's been really lost, which is beauty. I mean, not to say that in a cliche, but actually, like, where is beauty? Where's Venus? Where's Aphrodite? How do we kind of like to turn our attention away from, while not ignoring, but turning our attention to the beauty creation. So there's just better stories that can be manifest in through Aquarius, because Aquarius can only make those algorithms with the dreaming process of Pisces.
Oh, you said that so eloquently. I could have listened to you all day long. That was amazing. It's true. It goes back to that dichotomies to be able to understand that they're two beautiful archetypes at play. And the dichotomies is to be able to be the observer and watch, not be in it, but actually watch what's taking place and not judge what's taking place. And I think that's what I'm seeing a lot of. It's interesting that you're saying that, because I was explaining that I'm being that positive individual that I am, I always look at the optimistic side of things, typical Piscean sun, but optimistic side of things. And so for me, it's like, oh, I think, even though, because everyone was like saying the great divide that everyone speaks about. And I think, oh, but when I always look at it, if there's going to be an increase in shadow, there's going to be an increase in light somewhere else. So there's obviously, to me, I see that there's I don't see doom and gloom. I see the light aspect of the shadow as well. So for me, I just think, oh, well, that means things are going to get better. We're heading in the right direction. And we've just got to learn how to hold our light. This is, what I'm thinking. But then I'm seeing all of these things that have taken place over the years with, obviously I don't even want to use the word, but what's happened, in 2021 and now, like even with the politics, how it split families and friends. And it's for the very first time, Chris, when I was in France, I was sitting amongst people who actually spoke about what they'd agreed and didn't agree. And there was this beautiful, connection with everyone. Just, it's okay that you think that way or you believe that. But you know what? I'm curious. What makes you think that way? Because I want to learn from you. And I've never seen that before. I have never, ever experienced that. And to me, there was this level of, it's okay to not all agree. It's okay to disagree, that kind of thing, which I've heard people banter, but never seen it with my own eyes. So that gave me hope that maybe things are shifting. Maybe there's a shift in consciousness that we're starting to understand that maybe there is more to, what meets the eye, what's in front of us. There's something bigger here at play.
Again, we come back to Hermes, right? Because Hermes is the character that's able to travel in between worlds. So when Hermes sees something, he just acts with curiosity. It's like, what's this about? Oh, that's interesting. He doesn't do it with shame, blame, judgment, any of that. He's just like, oh, how did you get to that position? That's really interesting to me. So that scene that you give me in France is like, yeah, it's a beautiful thing, because in that, I do think we need to look back. We need to spend a little bit of time here, because I feel like the world just kind of went like, oh, that was that. Let's move on. It's like, it's pretty hard to move on for a lot of people. And when you work in my position, your position, when you work with people one to one, people freely say that they were really injured by what's happened, that they were really profoundly affected by what's happened. And it's not okay when someone's really profoundly affected just to move on. So this thing, it's like we need to get into the chamber together, right? We all need to get it back into the chamber. Now, I think Pluto in Aquarius can be a symbol of that. Can we get into because I've been thinking about the myth of it, are you familiar with who Ganymede is?
No.
So Ganymede is the figure who is the water bearer. He's actually the wine bearer for the gods and is the figure for Aquarius. So the constellation itself is the myth of Ganymede. and Ganymede gets taken by an eagle um, up into the upper world. So he's abducted and taken up into the upper world, up into the mind, right? And this is what can happen. The mind can be like splitting things off. And he's pouring wine for the gods, so he gets all the secrets for the gods. And that's the Aquarian thing. It's like it has the secrets from the gods, and then it tries to pour that out to the humans, tries to sort of like sneak that down back to the humans. But it's like a splitting off process, right? Because it's an abduction in a sense that goes upward, whereas Pluto also, obviously classically is more like Persephone, who's abducted downward. So we have a double abduction going on, right? And we sort of have to do that way of bringing the underworld to the upper world. And again, well, who could possibly do something like that archetypally? Hermes could do it, or any of the psychopomp gods or goddesses, that psychopomp meaning guides of souls, that can sort of like come in with their deft hand and steer a conversation like that, rather than one side or the other or both getting very emotionally charged and essentially arriving back at the old good versus evil thing of like, well, you only believe that because you're evil. um, Rather than that, get inquiring, get curious, get interested. And I think we can find, like, even from the COVID times, we can find, like, well, what do you know that I don't know? Right? Like, what do I know that you don't know? If we could just share that back and forth as a couple of humans or a group of humans, because it's got to happen on individual and group levels in order to happen on collective levels. And if it's not happening there, it won't happen there. That's very much kind of like the microcosm, macrocosm perspective of the world. And one other thing that you just said there, that's how I would describe craniosacral, is you don't make a judgment, you just get really interested, and you're the observer, but you're also participant, because there's no such thing as an observer, like there's no such thing as a neutral observer. But what we learned, like from my mentor, 7 years of studying with him, what I learned from him is just that. How do you just allow yourself to be as neutral as an observer as is possible without any judgment? And then a human system will feel, one, the presence of hands, but not necessarily doesn't have to be hands, but certainly the presence of observation and being observed by somebody who's not judging you and not and leaving a lot of room for you. The body, because of it's such an intelligent thing, will naturally find wholeness. And I think that's a metaphor and also true of the physical body, but then we are all a body. And I think that's what Aquarius is telling us. Like, we are all actually in this together. It's like the one absolute truth, that we're all in it together. What happens to one of us is happening to all of us. And so how do we then use that? This is why craniosacral is such a beautiful thing to learn first up, alongside astrology, is that it is the ability to hold the tension, not get fixated, not get caught on anything, and allow the system to express itself. And as it's expressing itself, it's healing, as in becoming whole. That's what the word means, right?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about the fact that, the whole oneness, we are all one. We are all in this together. And so if you judge your brother, your sister, your neighbor, you're actually judging yourself. And those things that people, I'm big on projection. Like, you wouldn't be able to see it if it didn't reside within you. And a lot of the times when you're pointing that finger out, there's three fingers pointing right back at you, which is telling me there's stuff, wounds that needs to be healed or looked at or leaned into. But a lot of people don't want to hear that, Chris. It's like too much accountability here.
You know what, Catherine, as you said, because I've heard that before, and I just realized, yes, three are pointing back at you, and your thumb is pointing to the gods.
Yes. Oh, I like that extra piece. I love it. That is so cool. Chris, I'm going to have to get you back on the show because I'm conscious of your time and I
Yes,
haven't even
please.
answered all my questions, because I did have some questions I wanted to really unpack. But the way that we love to wrap up the show is we love to wrap up the show with free shiny golden nuggets. So what would be those free shiny golden nuggets that you would like to share with our audience today?
Well, I'm going to cheat on this one, and I'm going to remember what I've already said to you before. Just as a declaration to your audience that I'm cheating. I'm looking back at words that I've already written. Um,
I love
but the
your
three,
honesty.
I
Love it.
don't want to be deceptive about it. Um, so three golden nuggets. I like the question, and I won't do it just what's emerging. I'll do it with what I've written before. Um, so. Yeah, so here's what I found. This is number one, is that in psychotherapy, um, analysis can divide the psyche, whereas imagination can string it all together. And that's kind of like this thing of the left brain, right brain, right? Like we actually really need that more imaginative mind to kick in, even if we think that's just child's play or using your imagination as something for children or it's like whatever it is. If we're not using our imagination, we're not really doing healing. We're just separating things out even more. Um, Number two, I think that so many things are lost in history that are really useful that we think we've moved away from because we think of them as like primitive or whatever we think about them as. And I think it's incorrect to think that the things from the deep past are not useful today because actually the things in the deep past, they aren't really even in the deep past. I think what the Greeks were getting at was a timeless wisdom, and I think it really is timeless in that that's why when you hear the stories or get into a story, you recognize it in your own body, in your own system, in your own life. It may be playing out in a millionth of a variation, but you recognize the myths because they're not time bound, those myths. And so ancient technologies, I think, are really essential for the modern world. And that's one of the great bridges that me, probably as a Cancerian, because Cancerians live in between the land and the sea, and they try to go to the sea and come back to the land, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But anyway, that is for me trying to get back to the deep unconscious things, the things that we forgot about, the things that we lost that are still very, very, very relevant today, maybe even more so than ever. And and this last one probably speaks to the things that we've been talking about today, especially within craniosacral, that in the healing world, often the best thing to do is to get out of the way. And to try to fix is often to fixate and to make things more stuck. So those would be my little shiny golden nuggets that are found in the ocean.
I love all three. Thank you so much, Chris. You're amazing. You're wonderful. I love your energy. I love your wisdom. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Where do you hang out the most?
Where do I hang out? Well, I live
Mm.
in Bali in Ubud. I'm up in the north part of Ubud with my little practice that I've set up here. I like to call it an abaton, which is the dream chambers of Asclepius back in Epidaurus. You literally walk down a spiral staircase, and it's in the jungle to get to my little treatment space.
Oh,
Really
beautiful.
beautiful. I hang out here, but I've also started to travel a little bit more. I'm planning a trip next year to Greece, to run one of my first kind of like tour training things, with a woman named Colette Davis, who's an incredible yogi tantric woman. She's
I think
amazing.
I
So
know
we're putting a
Colette.
little. Oh,
Yeah.
do you? Yeah,
Yeah.
she's so great. You probably do know her.
Yeah.
So we're going to be getting together and doing sort of the mythic movement and ancient sites thing. We're just putting that together now. So like a lot of cool things coming up. I'm also going to be at the Federation of Australian Astrologers in on the Gold Coast in January. I'm going to be doing a few lectures there and some experiential things. So if anybody wants to come and hang out with me, I would come to the Federation of Australian Astrologers conference. That's in on the Gold Coast in it's like January 16th to 19th, 2025. So it's coming up.
Beautiful. We'll have all of that in the show notes. I would say I would be there, but I'm actually going to be in France on the 21st in minus
Amazing.
10 degrees, but otherwise I'd be there.
Yeah.
But thank you once again. We'll have everything in the show notes. And seriously, I am going to get you back on the show. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and your
I'd love
energy.
to come back on anytime, Catherine. Thank
Thank
you.
you.